Hello again. Thank you for joining us on our YouTube channel, Our Best Days. I'm Marcus Overstreet and this is my wife, Amy.
Hi.
We're happy you're here with us once again, and we've reached the end of this very unorthodox school year. And after 5 months of study, we've also reached the conclusion of the Beatitudes. The Beatitudes are the preamble of the constitution of the kingdom of Jesus. The Beatitudes are the metaphorical hiking boots we wear to climb the Sermon on the Mount. So let's go ahead and dive in with our last Beatitude. It comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Let's read this. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you.
Wow. Blessed. It doesn't really sound so blessed to hear about being persecuted and insulted and have people lie about you. This sounds more like a punishment than a blessing. And the other thing that I notice is it is done to us. This is one that happens to us. The other ones that we've talked about the past few videos are things that we work on, character traits that we seek to have, or fruit of the Spirit that we seek to acquire to imitate Jesus's character. And this is just sort of a byproduct of all of that, and it's not that exciting or fun.
This is a beatitude that you certainly will not find too many hashtags about.
No.
People don't make t-shirts about this beatitude. It's not something you find on a bumper sticker. It's just certainly not that fun.
No calligraphy.
Jesus hides nothing in the fine print. Once again, this is a paradox teaching from Jesus. You are blessed if you're insulted. If people make fun of you and say bad things about you, hey, let's throw a Super Bowl party. So let's go ahead and dive into this beatitude and see what we can learn from Jesus. Well, first of all, let's check this out. All of the beatitudes that we've studied thus far, they are short one-liners, and they're spoken in the third person, with the exception of this last one. It does start in verse 10 with, blessed are those who are persecuted. But then in verses 11 and 12, for the first time in the Beatitudes, Jesus repeats himself, and he repeats himself in the second person. Jesus says, blessed are you. People insult you, or they persecute you, and great is your reward. And Amy, I think Jesus is trying to get our attention here with the way he's speaking.
Persecution is one of those things that when you have experienced it, you know it. There's all different kinds of persecution. It happens today. It happened 2,000 years ago. And really, there's all different kinds. And Jesus even tries to give some examples of how it might happen. And we certainly can think of the most extreme examples like martyrdom, but all the way back to insults or just people saying things that are lies about you. That's persecution too. But when you have experienced it, it is so personal that you know you've experienced it. And I really think that's why Jesus goes in and changes that pronoun to say you, because he is pointing out it might look different for each person, but when you feel it, you know.
Yeah, for Jesus, think about what he experienced as he was teaching on this topic and what he knew was coming in the future in terms of persecution. For Jesus, I don't think it hurt the most to feel persecution from King Herod or Pilate. Where it hurt the most was from his own people, getting rejected in his own hometown. The religious leaders condescended towards Jesus and hurt him and persecuted him and doubted him. And then, of course, even his own family. So that's when it hurts, when it's an inside job, so to speak. And I know you and I have experienced that. Many of you watching this have experienced it It's the people close to you that you let into your life, the people you get involved with, that really have an opportunity to break your heart the most. That's the pain. That's how personal it is to be persecuted. Now, it's important to realize what this beatitude does not say. It does not say, blessed are the persecuted, period. All right, you have to keep reading. It's blessed are the persecuted because of righteousness. Blessed are those who are insulted because they are living the kingdom life. That's a really important caveat when we read this.
Yeah, absolutely, because firstly, it doesn't even feel like a blessing to be persecuted, and people are persecuted for all kinds of things. The color of their skin, for instance, or where they live, or how they dress. And unfortunately, Christians have been persecuted for many of the wrong reasons, for thousands of years, and try to claim it as a badge of honor because Jesus says, blessed are the persecuted, but he says because of righteousness. So when Christians are persecuted because they love their traditions more than loving God, when they are rude and care more about their rules and their expectations than they care about people, when they're insensitive, when they are racist, when they are overly nationalistic and that keeps them from loving people of all nations, proud, judgmental, homophobic. These are things that Christians around the world are known for and get persecuted for, but that is not the reason we should be being persecuted.
Those two words are so important in this teaching of Jesus. Here in verse 10, because of. Blessed are you when you're persecuted because of righteousness. This is vital. Jesus really clarifies it in verse 11. He says, basically, blessed are you if you're insulted because of me. So what we're talking about here is getting persecuted because you're living the kingdom life just like Jesus. You're living and breathing and making decisions every day in your imitation of Jesus. You look like Jesus, you sound like Jesus, you walk like Jesus, and as you said last time, you even smell like Jesus. That's the reason you're getting persecuted, and that's what Jesus is referring to here.
Yes, he was persecuted, and so the more we become like him, the more likely we are to experience persecution as well.
And I don't think it's any coincidence that Jesus ends the Beatitudes talking about persecution, because you're going to get persecuted if you're living out the ethos of all the Beatitudes that come before this one, because what Jesus is teaching here, what his expectation is of the kingdom here, this clashes head on with the values of the world. This is an epic battle that goes on, and this is very, very different. So I really encourage you, just go back and look at some of our previous videos to learn about those Beatitudes, because if you live those out, okay, it's wonderful and you're rewarded for it, but at the same time, Jesus wants us to know that there will be persecution as well. It's just not the norm of the world. And one way I really think this stands out, I'll just pick one of them, is when someone is after me and insulting me because of righteousness, when I'm feeling that condescension, someone's out to get me and prove me wrong and come after me, I have to look to Jesus. The last thing I want to do is to be meek. It says, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. That's Jesus 100%. Can you imagine the creator of this world, the Son of God, comes, his own family rejects him, his hometown wants to throw him off a cliff after he preaches to them, and then the religious leaders think they're better than him, and they feel envious, and they challenge him, and eventually they help get him on the cross and kill him. And yet the entire time, Jesus is meek. He is strength and power under control. I love that about Jesus. Yeah,
I think about how when we are pure in heart and we are completely focused on God, and that's our number one priority, it sounds nice, but the ramifications are that is what you're putting first. You're putting your relationship with God above your job, above your family, quite frankly. And that impacts those people. And sometimes they don't like it. Sometimes our employer doesn't want other things to be competing for our time and our energy. They want us to give all of our time and energy to our job or to that bottom line. And even our family, that's a really important priority, obviously. And I believe husband and wife is next besides God, and then our children come afterward. But they are not supposed to be in the place of God, and certainly we also have extended family that can feel in competition for that relationship and the time that we spend and the energy that we put into that. And really, it's ultimately about being pure in heart, but it can create friction and bother people.
And I think Paul would later sum this up very well in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12, where Paul writes, "In fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted." And so this applies to all of us, whether it's persecution from our employer, it could happen on social media, and perhaps most painful of all, it's when you're trying to deal with sin and relationships in the church among Christians. That conflict can be extremely painful. So this begs the question, how do we do it?
It's hard, no.
That's why I'm leaving it to you to answer this question.
No foolproof answers, but I do think about Jesus and his final hours leading up to the crucifixion and the many ways he was persecuted. He was abandoned by his friends. He was lied about. He was questioned. His motives were questioned and put under fire. He was obviously physically persecuted. And ultimately, he was put in the proving mode, is what we call it, meaning like, I don't really believe you. I don't really trust where you come from. I don't really trust that you say you are who you say you are. But if you prove it, if you do enough, then I'll believe it. He was really put in that position on the cross, which is a terrible place to be, and really is a form of persecution as well. And in each scenario, he certainly experiences pain. It's not like he's seems to be relishing this persecution, but ultimately we know that it is for a greater victory and a greater blessing for him and for all of us that he faces it and he walks through it, and he stays silent when he's lied about. He does not bow to the pressure of having to prove himself. He continues to show love to his friends while they are acting traitorous and abandoning him. He calls Judas his friend. He looks to John and to his mom and puts them in a loving and caring relationship. He continues to look out for others. He offers even comfort and forgiveness to the other men that are on the cross beside him. So rather than looking inward, rather than becoming the ultimate victim where his power is given away to these persecutors, he maintains control, he maintains his integrity, his closeness to God, and really ultimately he seems to stay focused on why all of this is happening in the first place. Jesus was persecuted for righteousness' sake. It wasn't for any of the other things that we talked about in the beginning of the video. He had his mind on the plan of God, and that was why he was experiencing that kind of persecution. And I believe he kept his heart and his mind steadfast on that goal. And I think that's what we can do. We can imitate him. And really, if we are being persecuted, listen and see, are people pointing out something in us that isn't righteous? And it is actually something that we need to change. Or is it something that we have set out to do? It is something we've set out to do to please God. We've prayed about it, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to imitate Jesus. Then we need to stay steadfast in our goal. But the other thing that Jesus does is before he embarks on that long night where he experiences all of that persecution, he has a full night of prayer. It isn't just one prayer. It isn't a good luck prayer. He prays until he's done. He prays until he can say, "Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. He is not a victim. He's the ultimate victor. And so that kind of prayer, praying 3 times, praying until he's done, until he's ready, connects him to God, connects him to the supernatural power, connects him to his ultimate purpose, and allows him to face that with love, with compassion, with grace, even with silence when that's necessary. And we can look to him and imitate all of those qualities when we face persecution as well.
And I think that night of prayer right before the massive amount of persecution came, that's the classic example of Jesus. He was poor in spirit, even though he was the perfect man and sinless, and all these things were about to happen to him that were undeserved. There he is, face in the dirt, poor in spirit, begging God for help, mourning over the sin in this situation. As we learn about the Beatitudes, Jesus not only teaches the Beatitudes and expects us to live this way, I'd say Jesus is the Beatitudes. This is his character. And what a beautiful thing when we're able to have those moments, those seasons of our lives where we're able to be like Jesus and be persecuted for the right reasons. Yeah. Now, of course, with persecution, insults, and abuse, there comes a reward beyond measure. If you've been watching these videos, you know that every beatitude starts with an expectation of living by Jesus, and then there comes an incredible reward. Now, what we can note here is with persecution, the reward is the same as what we started with in the beginning. Blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who are persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus will go into more specifics about this, but I think this is something we all must keep in mind if we're persecuted for being like him. If we're persecuted because of righteousness, we do have to look to the reward as a motivator. Just 1 second in heaven, and it will all make sense. Just a few hours in heaven, and all of it will begin to become crystal clear for us. A few days in heaven, and we'll say, man, this was all worth it to live like Jesus. What an incredible reward when we can call the kingdom of heaven ours because we're imitating Jesus and we're saved by the blood of Jesus. So stay with us after we say goodbye. As we typically do, we will put some questions up on the screen that you can use for personal reflection or to have some group discussion so we can work together to handle the persecution and make sure we're getting persecuted for the right reasons. When this video ends, we also want to ask a favor of you. Please just take 1 moment to click on the subscribe button for our YouTube channel. This way you can support our content and our videos for our best days. It's really been a pleasure exploring the Beatitudes with all of you. For my wife Amy here, I'm Marcus, and just want to remind you our best days as Christians are right in front of us.
Thanks for watching.
So
we
long,
love
everybody.
you guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.